Mick Bohan, the Dublin Senior Football Manager, is with us in studio. Morning, Mick.
Good morning to you.
We were just shooting the breeze in the Kevin Gaban chat there, and you were in France.
I was, yeah.
How was that?
Thoroughly enjoyable for the South African game, obviously, but there last weekend, a little bit different. Obviously, we weren't involved, but huge amount of Irish still travelled. Obviously, the packages were in place, but disappointment. But at the same time, I think Johnny Sexton's statement during the week made sense to me. Like, you know, they lost, but they won. Like, the amount of pride they brought to a nation I thought it was huge, you know, and the opportunity to dream for us all. Like, I mean, we all kind of believed that this was an unbelievable opportunity, and, you know, probably that one game was the difference between being in a quarter-final and being in a final.
It's a great line. I can see a lot of coaches using that down the track.
Yeah, fabulous, and it sums it up. Yeah.
Can you switch off watching rugby, or are you watching it from a coaching perspective and picking up little tips and tricks?
Yeah, I enjoy going to other games and just seeing. Like, I mean, a couple of weekends back we were over in Glasgow. My little one's soccer team. We were over. Celtic were playing Kilmarnock and like that, and you're just watching different things around the edges, and I do enjoy that because you're not invested, so therefore you can see it a little bit more clearly. But obviously, from an Irish perspective, you know, emotions are a little bit different on a day like that. Yeah, but I thoroughly enjoy it. Yeah.
A lot of people are looking at Andy Farrell's methods and the coaching team, and like seems like sort of one of the lads. It's like they talk to him about, like, Faz is doing this and Faz is doing that. Are you looking at that dynamic and thinking there's something I can take out of that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm obviously I don't know the intricacies of his management team, but he seems to be very inclusive. He's definitely created a family atmosphere around the group. And I mean, obviously, the pun with family, and obviously including the families on the trip. But there's an awful lot of people distance people from outside the camp. You know what I mean? That, you know, there's a shut-off point. You can't come to train. You can't be part of the group. Meetings are held. You can't have that distractions. And then he went the opposite way. He included them. But there's a really interesting point on that, because we did this a couple of years ago with our group. You know, the whole study behind why do they play? Why do they give in the errors that they do? Why do they, I mean, the words, a lot of people say there's no sacrifice, that it's a privilege, but there is a sacrifice, like, because ultimately, no, it's a sacrifice that's worthwhile, but ultimately there's no such thing as going out on a Friday night. There's no such thing as weddings. There's, you know, all these things are during the season. They're just off limits, because you may attend, but you're not really there because you've something the following day. There's always something, all right? But the bottom line is, we did a study with our group, and why do they do it? Why are they doing all of this? And the number one reason is family. That is the number one reason. And if you look at that, so girls, boys, it's no different. Like, I mean, they all come out of the same household. So he's dived into that and saying, well, if the number one thing that makes his troop tick are their families, well, I better include them.
Can I ask you an unusual question, just as you say that I always hear that comment, and this is the cynic in me, so bear with me, and I always think that it's sometimes used as an excuse for the commitment that we'll talk about that you have to give, obviously, for the gig that you're in with Dublin, the commitment that the players have to give to reach the heights that they've reached, and obviously with professional athletes, in the sense of the Irish team, like, you're away from your family for long periods of time. Like, it's not a good family decision to choose to become a high-level GAA player or coach or a professional athlete. It always feels to me like I feel bad about all that stuff, and so I'll say I'm doing it for my family. But is there, what's your read on that? Is that a too cynical view?
No, that's a fair point, because there is a selfishness in it.
Selfishness,
there's no doubt about that. There is a selfishness. I mean, like, at the end of the day, you know, people come up to you at the end of the year and you say, like, you're either fair play to you, you're going again, and the commitment of having whatever else, and you're there front line and getting a slap on the back, but somebody's covering for you. You know what I mean? So obviously, so that is a little bit tongue in cheek. You know what I mean? And even at the end of the day, you know, if you're lucky enough to be successful, whatever else, I did it for my family, and to be honest, no, you didn't, right? But from a player's perspective, it is different from a player's perspective because, like, and I give you an example. Mick Fitzsimon's sister Grania was involved with us this year, and I would have met their parents on the night of the All Ireland, and I was talking about the immense pride that they must feel as a parent. I mean, two children to have won All Ireland medals in the one household in different gender sports, and I can only imagine. I haven't experienced that. I can only imagine the pride that they would have experienced. So for the player, there is definitely that, giving that sense of pride back to the household. I think from a managerial perspective, it isn't the same. Realistically, you aren't getting.
It's all sacrifice, and
that's I don't. It is for the people who cover it. In my situation, my good lady, and they do miss out. Although I had this conversation with Jim Gavin recently. One of the things I would say that's different between our setup, and I think a lot of it is, although Andy Farrell has done it with the Irish teams, we haven't had a shutdown on families. A lot of, even at the weekend, some of the management team are stuck and the kids would come to train, and now, like, we have a setup. They're obviously not involved in the middle of the session. They're not interfering with meetings or whatever, but they're present. They're there. That wouldn't have even been considered in the lad setup. Do you know what I mean? So, and that's like my view on that. Because of the females are involved, they actually enjoy the kids around a little bit more. There is that little bit of nurture about a girl that's a little bit different than a fella. And I can't imagine, I don't know, but I can't imagine the Irish setup that the families are present in or around training. Nothing to do with that. It's just after that, the periods in the evening time or the low time. I presume that's what they do.
Yeah. Well, I know in the previous regime it was, as you've alluded to.
Correct, yeah.
It was not, do not step in.
Yeah.
And just in relation to that aspect, then, we've Ronan O'Gara on fairly regularly, and he's linked fairly regularly with a lot of different gigs, so it comes up pretty regularly as a point of conversation. But he will always say that any decision he's making about his future is made in tandem with the family. It feels like a very honest point that he makes, and it doesn't feel as if there's any other motive behind it other than that's a really important thing. You've obviously committed yourself to another year. Is that something that you will do? Is that something you need to do at that point, and sit down and say, is this okay?
Absolutely, and I'm not quite sure this time went down too good. In fact, my kids were probably a bigger push on me returning, and I've a little one. My youngest is 10, and she actually loves coming, and I look in the back of the van sometimes, and she'd be there, I'd be out you get. But she would have had a big influence. That's a fact.
Really?
And yeah, absolutely, because she and Mays were going to training last night, and she was asking, when are we going back, and when will I see the girls again? And she does see them like a group of big sisters, which is not, it's kind of unique. And that was definitely a selling point in the home.
When you're doing up the pros and cons, and the cons are beginning to weigh a bit. That's a heavy weight.
At the end of the day, I mean, I do get a huge amount back out of it. I mean, like, the reward of obviously seeing a team play at a certain level, or coaching coming to the fore, all of that gives you a huge buzz. You wouldn't go back if you didn't get that. But equally, the group themselves and the quality of people that are involved that make it worthwhile. And I'm not just talking with the players, the management group that I've been lucky enough to surround myself by. A lot of them I would have worked with under the lads, set up, and we pulled them in. And those friendships are key, because if you're not enjoying, away from the games, if you're not enjoying the setup around it, or the meetings, or literally walking into a room with the people that you're sitting down with, then it's very difficult to motivate yourself to go again. Yeah.
Because the year before this, the All-Ireland quarter-final defeat to Donegal, I know you'd said that you basically made your mind up to quit and walk away.
Yeah.
Like, aside from the family reasons, is it a case of even the rise of Meath, the rise of Kerry as well? Do those factors come into it as well, that you're thinking, well, Jesus, there's a challenge here. There are teams coming to take the crown, essentially?
Yeah, absolutely. And just, I'm not pulling you, but that is part of our psyche. See the language you use there, to quit. Well, that's not what I saw it as.
Yeah.
I know the city that we survive in. There is an expectancy. When we hadn't achieved, the thought process in my head was, it's time for someone else to come in. It's time for fresh ideas. It's time for someone else to bring an impetus that I obviously have stopped bringing. That was the thought process in my head. It wasn't a situation, well, you guys aren't good enough, I'm walking away. That just wouldn't, that's not in my, in fact, and I would be very like the first person I look at. I beat myself up over that game for, I'd say, the guts 3 months. So, like, there is that aspect to sport, and that's not always good. Like, I mean, going into a dark place when it doesn't go well, and realistically, most teams it doesn't go well for. There's only one winner. But that's something I've probably struggled with a little bit in sport, in that, you know, the downs are really down, you know what I mean? And the highs are never as high as the down gets to. So after that period of time, it was definitely a sense of reflection of it's someone else's turn. And then it was a situation whereby, like, we had a really honest meeting with the group and management in particular were frustrated that we hadn't given the best of ourselves. And then what happens in that setup is, or the tendency is, if as head of the ship, if I stepped, it wouldn't be a matter of, well, the management team can continue on and someone else will put it. It would be a complete new broom, because that's what tends to happen. And you lose an awful lot of good. Not everything was wrong. Like, there was obviously some things wrong, but not everything was wrong. So the worry in that situation is that the whole thing gets thrown out, and then you have 3 or 4 key players who don't have the appetite to start all over again. It's like this year, I don't know what's happened with the likes of James McCarthy or Stephen Cluxton or Dean Rock or any of these guys, but I do know if Desi went, it would be a much easier decision, you know.
End of an era, yeah.
Like, the only way to get around it is to have some sort of planned, what's the word I'm looking for?
Roll on.
Like, you have somebody within
succession
your group.
plan.
Succession was the word I was looking for.
Well, in fairness to John Costello in Dublin County Board, like, I do know that when Jim stepped down, essentially the team was in place. Obviously, Desi brought in his own selectors, but everything else was in place around him. And I would see that, you know, that's the template. Like, you see too many times particularly in Gaelic games, like, so a new manager comes in and everything else gets thrown away. But in that setup, there had to have been some good things that were working, right? But the tendency is, no, they bring in their people. And I'm not sure that's good, because then all of a sudden you're starting from scratch all over again. And it takes quite a lot to rise the boat, while if it's only small little things that you have to change around the edges, it's not as big a task.
It's funny because now that you've signed on for an 8th season, this is probably a moot question, but, you know, even in recent years, you would have been linked with different jobs, the Roscommon men senior job, probably on a couple of occasions, certainly in the press. But when you do ultimately step aside from the Dublin role, like, is it a case of take a break, step away from the game, unwind, or is a new challenge something that you genuinely would think about?
So I spent 7 years with DCU, 8 years with DCU, between Sigerson and Freshers and whatever else. So obviously the connections. Martin Conroy was the secretary of the college at the time, who was involved in Club Rossi, and I think there was 8 or 9 lads from Roscommon who came through the college, and a lot of it was down to the connection of Martin being there. And obviously at that time, it was definitely a breeding ground for Dublin football, right? The college's scene has probably changed a little bit, even though I have a huge value on the Sigerson competition. So there was a lot of the Roscommon lads. So obviously I befriended some of them. So that was the connection between Roscommon, and the minute this job is up, your name is linked, and sure, without even a conversation, it all of a sudden becomes factual, right? Which we all know that, right? I spent a year with Clare, and my father passed away, and my best friend, who I thought with for a long period of time, who had moved to Clare and married a Clare woman, he passed away within 4 or 5 months. So the 2 lads within 5 months was kind of a big blow. And I was involved with the Dubs at the time, and my heart was gone for that period of time. I took a bit of time out, fully in my own head, intending to get back involved with Jim. And I don't know, one thing led to another, and I ended up meeting Colin Collins, and something hit me that here was an opportunity to mark the 2 boys who had had a big influence in my life. and it wouldn't have been a popular thing to do, like to go from All-Ireland champions, National League winners to Clare, but it was one of the things I reflect on my coaching career. I am so happy I did it, and a huge disparity in lots of ways, and yet so many similarities in other ways. Playing in Division 3, which we ended up, one of the most memorable things I've ever been involved in, won a Division 3 final against Kildare and Croke Park, coming from behind. But the travel was huge. And I would have said this often, that, I think I was 45th or 46th training session and we hadn't had a dry night, and you're driving the car west into sheets of rain, and you hold the steering wheel different. I remember having a strain in my neck for months after that year, because when the weather's dry, you hold the steering wheel kind of, lightly. When the wind and the rain's coming, you're holding it forcefully, and 3 hours up and 5-6 hours up and down the road, it's some journey. So coming back to the, what would you do? I genuinely find it really difficult to be involved in anything else other than a Dublin team. And why did I do? Well, I had a motivation that year with the Clare situation, and obviously we've an affinity to Clare. But I look at other people who do it, and I think, what motivates them? That when you get up and you go to a training session, it's like a little bit like teaching. You have to be full of energy. You have to put on a bit of an act at times, because you're and you can't go in bad form, no matter what's going on in your life. You could come from mayhem in the house, but you have to go in a different. So to go up and down the country to different teams, I'd find that very difficult, I'd have to say.
Now, there's a million questions out of that. We're going to have you back another time, Mick, to get into all of that. You brought in a couple of lovely bound books here, coaching manuals. Tell us about what you have.
We put these together initially for the development squads, but then we decided to use them as a fundraiser for the group. So we've a modified games practice booklet and a skills challenge, a scorecard, a recording for the players themselves, where they record it, and there's a lot of really good stuff in it.
So who are these aimed at?
Coaches and players. One is particularly for the players, because if you don't measure, you can't improve. So that's the whole basis behind it, and we would use these with the lads and the girls and whatever else. So essentially we have them up on Shopify, and the URL is mickbohan.myshopify.com. So for people, just for a little bit of insight that's completely different at kind of the elite level, we've just aimed at that.
So it's aimed at the top of the game.
So the answer to that is simple, and oftentimes I would do coaching courses around the country, and people say to you, I didn't, that was made so easy or whatever else, but that's the game. So essentially, whether it's under 10s or senior football, there's such a correlation between so many of the things. You're obviously going to speed it up, it's going to be done from a further distance, but the skills are always the skills.
Yeah.
And so that's what we've gone after. But there's a lot of key language and stuff, as I would often say to coaches, the language in the game, a common language in any sport is so important, and that's what we've actually put together. So essentially, one is the nuggets of the game, and then the other is a modified games booklet with stuff that we use live from the field.
So this is how Dublin won the All-Ireland, is that?
That's exactly it.
Blueprint, yeah.
Is there a fair bit of commonality from one group to another? I know you obviously, as you say, you haven't worked with a huge amount of others, but are teams in the women's game tending to do things is there a philosophy of training or of drills, specific drills that are common, do you think? Or
well, I don't know how much of the game you'd watch, but so, and this is an awful lot got to do with coaching. Every coach has a philosophy. I see the game being played in a certain way, and I love a free-flowing game of football. I'm a bit of a purist at heart. I do not like blanket defences. I do not like packed defences. It's a little bit like watching last weekend, watching the South Africa-England game. Would I go and watch rugby if it was played like that? No, I wouldn't. I've no interest in that, right? So the bottom line is I like to see an expansive game. And one of the things that I would be particularly proud of my group, because we put it to them, the game changed in the last few years in that obviously Meath brought quite a defensive style, as did Donegal. And in fairness to the group, they stayed true to their values in that, no, this is the way we're going to play. This is the way we play the game. And if we lose playing that way, so be it. We're going to stay true to our values. So I would see that like even in our training sessions, we do a much more kicking than probably a lot of teams would. And for me, they're the basics in the game. When we started with the lads, we would have had this conversation with Jim Gavin. We looked at Kerry, who were the purists, you know, they were the best kickers of the game. That made them the best catchers of the game. So if we're going to compete with them, well, we better be better at kicking and catching than they are. So all that has a knock-on effect. And I suppose I've been lucky enough to come through that system with people who wanted to see the game played in a certain light.
Yeah. I'm involved in under 8 and under 5 teams, so I was looking to see could I.
That's a present for you guys. Take it away.
There you go. Good Christmas present as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks a million. That was really enlightening. It went off, as I said, in a load of different unplanned areas that I definitely feel we could come back to again at some point down the track. But thanks a million for coming in. We'll put the link up on our social media feed so people can go. And the funds you're saying are going to
the team. Yeah.
To the team, so for a good cause as well.
Mick
Bohan, thanks a million. Best of luck for the next year.
You're welcome.
Cheers, Mick.
Okay, nice meeting you guys.